Sir Michael Gambon spent decades proving that presence alone could fill any room, a master who made every role feel inevitable. Richard Lewis turned his own anxiety into art, and audiences never stopped showing up for it. Michael Jackson didn't just dominate pop culture, he redefined what it meant for a single human being to become a global phenomenon, reshaping entertainment in ways that are still being felt today. David Crosby lived loud, survived louder, and left behind music that refuses to age. Loretta Lynn wrote her own story before anyone told her she was allowed to, and country music has never recovered, in the best possible way. Sinead O'Connor had a voice that could stop a room cold, and the courage to use it for things that mattered far beyond any chart. There are people who become cultural fixtures while they're still in the room. Dwayne Johnson is one of them. He isn't a legend being looked back on, he's a legend being watched in real time by hundreds of millions of people who feel in some private way, personally connected to him. That's not marketing. That's something rarer, and it starts with the people who shaped him. Rocky Johnson knew what it meant to fight for a foothold. A black Canadian wrestler who broke color barriers in territories across the American South during the 1960s and 70s, Rocky didn't just pass down a name, he passed down a philosophy. You don't wait for the door to open, you build the door. Dwayne has said publicly, more than once, that his father was the hardest man he ever knew, and also the man whose approval meant the most to him. When Rocky died in January 2020, Dwayne's tribute was long, raw, and public. He talked about their complicated relationship, the discipline that sometimes felt like distance, the lessons that only became visible in hindsight. Rocky Johnson didn't raise a movie star. He raised someone who understood that a body could be a tool, that presence could be a weapon, and that weakness was something you looked at directly and then worked through. Atta Johnson, Dwayne's mother, is the emotional architecture behind the public face. Her background? She's of Samoan descent, daughter of High Chief Peter Maivia, one of professional wrestling's most respected figures. Means that Dwayne didn't just inherit wrestling through one family line. He inherited it through two. But Atta gave him something beyond lineage. She gave him the story of resilience in its most intimate form. Dwayne has spoken openly about the day in 1986, when he was 14 years old, that he watched his mother step into traffic on Interstate 65 in Nashville. She survived. He carried that moment into adulthood and eventually, in 2018, opened up about his own experiences with depression, how that scene never left him, how it shaped the way he talked to his audience about mental health. For someone with his platform, that admission was seismic. It reached people who didn't expect a man who looked like Dwayne Johnson to say out loud that he had cried on the floor. It reached them because it was true. Peter Maivia, his maternal grandfather, died before Dwayne became famous, but the connection runs deep. In Samoan culture and in the world of professional wrestling, Maivia was royalty, literally by traditional title and figuratively by reputation. Dwayne grew up aware of what that name meant, and the weight of it wasn't decorative, it was directional. When he eventually stepped into the World Wrestling Federation in 1996 under the name Rocky Maivia, a combination of both his father's and grandfather's names, the tribute was deliberate. He was announcing in the only language that world understood, exactly who he came from. The early years in the WWF were not a triumph. Rocky Maivia was pushed as a babyface, a clean-cut, smiling hero, and the crowd rejected him immediately. "Die, Rocky, die" chants rang out at pay-per-view events. For someone who had already endured a failed CFL tryout, a $7 bank account after being cut from the University of Miami's football program, and the general undertow of early 20s failure, this was another specific humiliation. But Vince McMahon saw something. McMahon, who has never been accused of sentiment when there's business to be done, let Dwayne turn heel. Let him become The Rock, the arrogant, trash-talking, third-generation superstar who looked out at the audience with open contempt. The character worked because Dwayne wasn't entirely performing. The anger was real. The need to prove something was real. He just figured out how to channel it into a character that was bigger and louder and more entertaining than the polished hero nobody wanted. The Rock became one of the most commercially successful personas in wrestling history. The catchphrases, the eyebrow, the mic work, these weren't accidents. Dwayne has talked about studying promos obsessively, about watching Muhammad Ali interviews, about understanding that the microphone was a performance space as precise as any theater stage. His rivalries with Steve Austin, Mick Foley, and Triple H were built on genuine chemistry and mutual professional respect, and they drew some of the highest ratings in Monday Night Raw's history during the so-called Attitude Era. He was the most electrifying man in sports entertainment. He said so himself, and eventually the audience agreed. The pivot to film was not obvious, and the people around him were divided. His first significant film role came in 2001 with The Scorpion King, technically a spin-off of the Mummy franchise, where he reportedly earned $5.5 million, a record at the time for a first-time leading role. He was not a trained actor. He was a professional wrestler with charisma and a specific physical presence. The early reviews were mixed, but the box office told a different story. Audiences showed up. They showed up because they already trusted him, and that trust, built inside wrestling arenas over years of physical storytelling, transferred. Producer Hiram Garcia, Dwayne's cousin and longtime creative partner, has been central to understanding how the Hollywood chapter actually works. Their production company, $7 Productions, founded in 2012, named after the $7 that was all Dwayne had after being cut from the CFL, is not a vanity operation. It's a functioning studio that has produced Black Adam, the Jumanji franchise reboots, the Jungle Cruise film, Young Rock on NBC, and the Netflix series Red One. Garcia has spoken publicly about their shared philosophy. They aren't interested in being hired help. They want creative and financial control, and they have structured their deals accordingly. The $7 isn't nostalgia. It's a compass. Director Rawson Marshall Thurber worked with Dwayne on Central Intelligence, Skyscraper, and Red One, and has been consistently articulate in interviews about what makes him an unusual collaborator. Thurber has described Dwayne's discipline on set, the early call times, the preparation, the physical demands he places on himself, as something that resets the standard for everyone around him. He's also talked about Dwayne's comedic instincts, which are underestimated. Central Intelligence worked as well as it did because Dwayne understood exactly how to play against type. The enormous man, comfortable enough in his own absurdity to commit fully to the joke. Ryan Reynolds entered the picture, so to speak, through the Red One collaboration and the earlier teasing of a possible Deadpool-adjacent crossover universe, but more immediately through their shared public persona as two men who have turned personal branding into performance art. Their social media dynamic, built on mock rivalry and genuine mutual promotion, is one of the more studied examples of modern celebrity marketing. Each benefits, neither pretends otherwise. It's honest commerce dressed as friendship, and the fact that the friendship appears to be real makes it land differently than most celebrity cross-promotion. Kevin Hart is a different kind of relationship. They met on the set of the first Central Intelligence. Wait, that's wrong. They met earlier, in the orbit of overlapping Hollywood projects, and their pairing in the Jumanji Welcome to the Jungle reboot in 2017 became one of the more surprising commercial successes of that year. The film grossed over $962 million worldwide. Hart has talked in interviews about the dynamic between them, the height jokes, the competitive energy, the genuine affection underneath it. More importantly, their collaboration revealed something about Dwayne's instincts. He is at his best when he's working with someone who will push back, who won't simply defer to the biggest name on the call sheet. The DC chapter was ambitious and instructive. Black Adam, released in 2022, was a project Dwayne had been publicly developing for roughly 15 years. He was deeply, personally invested. The character's anti-hero moral complexity appealed to him, and he had spoken at length about wanting to shift the hierarchy of power in the DC universe. The film grossed $393 million globally, which, on its own terms, is a respectable number. But against its production and marketing costs, and within the context of DC's broader structural problems at the time, it was judged a disappointment. James Gunn and Peter Safran's arrival as the new creative leadership at DC Studios effectively ended the Black Adam franchise before it could expand. Dwayne acknowledged the outcome publicly without self-pity. The project didn't work at the scale he envisioned. He said so. That willingness to absorb a public professional failure without retreating into silence or blame is, in some ways, as revealing as any success. The audience relationship is its own chapter. He has more than 395 million Instagram followers, a number that places him among the most followed individuals on the platform globally. But the numbers aren't the interesting part. The interesting part is the texture of what he posts. The 4 a.m. workouts, the cheat meals, the candid shots with his daughters, the direct address videos that feel less like content and more like dispatches. People who study digital media have pointed to his feed as a case study in parasocial trust building, the sense that he's letting you in. Whether or not that sense is entirely accurate, it is consistently maintained. He has never had a major public scandal of the kind that derails careers. He has navigated cultural moments, including a 2021 controversy around past comments he made about trans athletes, with acknowledgement rather than deflection. His daughter, Simone Johnson, is now herself a professional wrestler, signed with WWE under the ring name Ava, and the fact that the lineage continues, Rocky Johnson to Dwayne Johnson to Simone Johnson, is the kind of story arc that would feel contrived if it were fiction. It isn't fiction. It's a family that found something in wrestling and has refused, across 3 generations, to let it go entirely. Dwayne has been careful not to overshadow Simone's career with his own gravity. He has supported her publicly while insisting publicly that the work is hers to do. The question that serious cultural observers have started asking about Dwayne Johnson is not whether he's successful, that's settled, but whether he represents something genuinely new in the category of American celebrity. His background is multiracial, multicultural, rooted in an art form that mainstream culture spent decades dismissing. His body, for much of his career, was treated as spectacle before it was treated as text. He came up through a business known for chewing people up, survived it, and then used the skills it taught him, the discipline, the character work, the audience reading, to build something that doesn't have a clean precedent. He's talked about wanting to run for president. He says he's not sure. The political class takes the question seriously enough that it gets asked repeatedly, which is itself a kind of answer about the cultural ground he occupies. He has been polled favorably by independent voters in surveys that political analysts have discussed with genuine interest, not as celebrity noise, but as a real signal. The people who shaped Dwayne Johnson, his father's severity, his mother's survival, his grandfather's legacy, his rival's pressure, his collaborators' belief, are all visible in the work, if you know where to look. He hasn't finished the work. That's not a caveat. That's the point. The story that began with a $7 bank account and a crowd chanting for his failure is still being written, still being watched, by an audience that shows up every single time he has anything to say.